Welcome to Lecture 3 of Christianity 125, Intro to Christianity. We are going to be finishing the book of Genesis today and moving into Exodus, and we will also very briefly touch upon Numbers, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy at the end of this lecture. It'll probably be broken into several parts. So we ended talking about Abraham and the promise that God had made Abraham to have land, descendants, and blessing. And so we're going to follow his descendants. There's not much to say about Isaac. Isaac was Abraham's promised son. His story doesn't take up very much time here in Genesis, only a couple of chapters. But he's kind of pictured as a shy, meditative person, and really the people around him get more focused than he does. Later his son Jacob and even his wife Rebecca will get a little more focused than him, but he does make some of the same mistakes that his father Abraham does as they move through their semi-nomadic existence. He also tries to pass off his wife Rebecca as his sister, and so it's interesting. You get that recapitulation going on, but really Isaac is a bridge to get us to the next main character, who's Jacob, and his story takes up many more chapters than Isaac's story. I hope you like my pictures here from old-fashioned Sunday school pictures. Just to give an overview of Jacob's life, he and his brother Esau were born twins to Isaac and Rebekah. Esau was the oldest, and Jacob was the youngest, but Jacob was shrewd. His name actually means heel grasper or deceiver, and when he gets older, he doesn't like the idea that his older brother has the birthright and the blessing, and so he develops ways to become essentially the older son. He manipulates Esau one day and gets him to sell his birthright to him for a bowl of soup. And then as his father gets older, he decides to trick his father into giving him a blessing instead of his older brother Esau. The tradition was that the father would bless the eldest son and also give him the birthright or inheritance. But here Jacob already has the birthright and he wants the blessing as well. And his mother Rebecca helps him do this. You can see favoritism playing a part already in this narrative. Rebecca's favorite son was Jacob and Isaac's favorite son was Esau, and that plays out in some dangerous ways in this narrative. And so Jacob does end up deceiving his older, pretty much blind father, Isaac, and he gets the blessing as well as the birthright. But then he has to leave because Esau is so angry, he is ready to kill him. As Jacob is on his journey to leave his home, he falls asleep one night and has a dream, and this dream is the famous Jacob's ladder. He sees a staircase or a ladder leading to heaven with angels up and down on it, and this vision helped him to connect to the promise that Yahweh was going to give him, and basically Yahweh confirms the promise. God confirms the promise that he gave to Abraham to Jacob here. So we see it's going to follow Jacob, the younger son, instead of Esau, which would have been the typical way that things would have gone in the ancient world. So Jacob, his story is long and complicated, but suffice it to say he marries two women and has two other women who are handmaids to have children and he ends up having 12 sons. And he also, just like his father and mother, play favorites. And so his favorite wife, Rachel, has two sons, Joseph and Benjamin, and Joseph is his favorite. And you will see how this becomes dangerous for Joseph and really the whole family. Joseph was also known for his dreams. So Joseph has dreams that his family would one day bow down to him. And not being a very smart man at this point, I think, he tells his brothers that. And so his brothers already know that Joseph is the favorite. In fact, Jacob has made Joseph a very important coat. Could be coat of many colors, could be translated as coat with long sleeves, which is like a lounging robe, which basically says that he doesn't have to do any work. And so you can understand why his brothers did not like him. And Genesis 37 says, when his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. They hated him so much, in fact, that they were going to kill him, but one of his brothers rescued him in a way by saying, let's just dump him in this pit and figure out what to do with him. Eventually, they sell him into slavery, and he makes his way to Egypt. Now, throughout the narrative of this great short story about Joseph, we learn that God is with Joseph, and because God blesses Joseph, Joseph does well wherever he goes. So he's in the house of a leader in Egypt named Potiphar, and he becomes really the head over everything because he's so responsible. But Potiphar's wife takes a liking to Joseph and tries to seduce him. When Joseph stood up for his morals and said no, then she, Potiphar's wife, accused him of trying to rape her. So he ends up in prison. So he's gone from a pit to a palace and now to prison. In prison, Joseph again is blessed. God blesses his work, and he's put in charge of all the other prisoners in the prison, and he ends up interpreting dreams for them. He interprets dreams for two of the workers from the palace, but he doesn't get him out of prison yet. Eventually, the people he interpreted dreams for remember him, and he ends up being pulled out of prison to interpret a dream for the Pharaoh of Egypt. Pharaoh had two dreams. One dream where fat cows were grazing and skinny, emaciated cows come out of the river and swallow up the fat cows. And another dream about weak sheaths of wheat, small puny ones, swallowing up large sheaths of wheat, of grain. And so he can't get anybody to interpret his dream for him. But because Joseph can interpret dreams and they brought him in, Joseph gives him the interpretation, which is very important for Egypt and for the people of Israel in the future. He interprets that Egypt would have 7 years of plenty, great crops and food, and then there would be 7 years of famine. This is a very important happening to know about. So what Pharaoh does is decides we have to save up our grain so that during the famine we'll be okay. And so he puts Joseph in charge of all the grain. And Joseph again rises to great power because of God's blessing. When the famine does hit, Joseph's family across all the land, people are suffering, and Joseph's family back in Palestine are suffering as well. And so Jacob tells his sons, I've heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. And that's what they do. Unbeknownst to them, they have to go see Joseph, who has been put in charge of all the grain, and ask him. But they don't recognize him when they get to Egypt. Joseph does recognize them, and after playing with them a little bit, devising an elaborate plan to get his little brother there, he eventually reveals himself. Along the way, one of the brothers, Judah, ends up trying to trade his life for the youngest brother, Benjamin. And this is a little bit of a foreshadowing of Judah and Judah's importance in the story later. But in the end, Joseph reveals himself and he forgives his brothers. And he uses his position of power to benefit the family. They move the whole family, all of Jacob's family, down to Egypt to live so that they can prosper and shepherd in peace. As you look over the story of Joseph, you can see the main theme is that God's plan and blessing was on Joseph. And this is an overarching theme of God's plan and blessing for the family of Abraham. All over and over and again, you see this line, the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. The other theme really is how God works through negative situations. Joseph recognizes at the very end of Genesis that all the bad things that had happened to him had worked for the good of all the people of his family, because Joseph was able to save his whole family. You intended to harm me, Joseph said, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So as you look back on this patriarchal history, Genesis 12 through 50, you can see that the themes are that God elected the family of Abraham as a representative family, as a family to have a special relationship with. God blessed them in order for them to be a blessing to all the world. And then you see that God displays a global perspective and purpose. The book of Genesis starts with the creation of all things. And then we realize that this plan that God has through Abraham is to reconcile the whole world, the world that has fallen away from him, reconcile that world back to him through this family, Abraham's family. Now, it transitions quite well from the end of Genesis to the beginning of Exodus. We see at the end of Genesis that Jacob took with him his sons and grandsons and daughters and granddaughters, and then it lists the names of the people who went to Egypt with him. Well, in Exodus 1, this is how it starts. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family. So you get the genealogy again, which becomes an important marker for a transition from Genesis into Exodus. Exodus focuses on Moses. And the Old Testament in general focuses on Moses as a leader more than any other individual leader in the whole story of Israel here. And we have talked about already how the Exodus event is the primary event of the Old Testament. The theme of Exodus is that God will rescue and redeem God's people. At the beginning of the next video, we'll watch the first Exodus video, but we'll keep going here. We've mentioned before that you can tell that the Exodus event is so important because the event covers 40 years, and yet Exodus through Deuteronomy are the narratives of those 40 years. While Genesis covered 4,000 years, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy covers only 40 years, beginning with Moses' call around age 80 and ending with his death at the age of 120. So the story could be familiar to you if you've ever seen some of the movies about Moses, but we do know that the Pharaoh that had become who had risen to power in Egypt many, many, many years after Jacob's family had gone and settled into Egypt. He did not remember Joseph, as the scripture tells us, and he's getting scared of this population of Israelites who continue to reproduce. He's enslaved them, and they are doing much of the work for Egypt, but now he's afraid that they will rise up, and so he engages in genocide by having the Hebrew baby boys thrown into the Nile. It's a horrific time in history. But the story of Exodus begins really with the story of hope, of courageous women amid this suffering and this slavery and their brave acts. So we learn about this. Most people don't stop to listen to this story, but in Exodus 1, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live." But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So these two women, in a silent and brave act of protest, do end up saving many people's lives. And then we see Moses' mother also tried to do an act of bravery. She hid Moses when he was born because she knew he would be killed. And then when it was too hard to hide him, she made a basket for him, just like Noah takes his family into a boat, and it's a boat that saves them from the waters. Here we see it's a small little boat that saves Moses from the waters, the deadly waters of the Nile River. And so she puts her baby with great faith and hope into this river, and he survives. And he's raised in the Pharaoh's palace because as he drifted down the river, it was the Pharaoh's daughter who found him and brought him in as a member of the royal family. Well, Moses grows up in this royal family, but something happens as he gets older. We're going to stop there because the video is about to end, and we'll pick back up with the Exodus video at the beginning of the next one.